This video is sponsored by Displate. Displate offers a wide range of high quality metal posters and have been something I've always been curious to try but was somewhat skeptical. Suffice to say, I am now a convert and will undoubtedly be ordering more. Displate carry a large catalogue of official artworks with major franchises including obviously Warhammer, but also the likes of Elden Ring, Star Wars, The Witcher, Destiny and so on. They also host artists who feature their own designs. They deliver fast within 5 days and their mounting system using magnetic pads enables you to swap designs at any time in seconds. The dimensions for designs are clear as you order, offering a medium, large and XL size. These sizes are not available for every individual artwork, but I've selected medium and large sizes to enable you to see the difference. In the past months of this year, I've been converting part of my house to a new studio for Warhammer purposes. There's still a bit more to do, like mounting the full tabletop board to the wall, but Displate reached out at the perfect time as I'm ready to add artwork to the room now. The metal prints are sleek but with some weight to them, and as you can see the prints are of a high quality finish. I also wanted to try out some designs with their new texture option to see whether this was worth it or not. Texture designs feature a raised contour and are available in matte or gloss finishes, and I thought these might catch the light too much and make viewing of the artwork difficult. This was not the case, and it simply adds an additional visual dimension to the images. Your Displate can also be chosen with a frame border style. It's important to note that these are not physical frames but a design element of the metal plate itself as seen here. Also important to be aware that if you choose a frame option, it will crop the image by a few millimeters and of course scale the image to fit within. For me personally, I chose a few designs with and without this effect for comparison. It's of course personal preference. Lastly, regarding the magnetic mounting system, it's very straightforward to apply and literally took me minutes. I wondered what my wife might say about these large adhesive magnets on the wall, but to my surprise she actually thought it was great. She liked the simplicity of application and the fact that you can switch out images. As she noted, these days people do tend to switch out artwork and likened it to your phone wallpaper. Mine, for example, updates daily. So I can see myself doing this with the artwork, especially when your flavour of 40k faction might change. I know I might feel inspired by artwork when I'm working on a particular army, for example, painting or playing with them. The Displate site features a solid selection of 40k artworks to choose from, including works from the legendary artist John Blanche. This month they're also celebrating the release of Space Marine 2 with a 3-piece version of the Titus battling Tyranid Horde image spread across 3 Displates. They also have a full range of Space Marine 2 artwork in the Warhammer section, but this special 3-piece artwork is only available until October 20th. They regularly do limited edition drops and so forth. You can use the discount link in the description or use my code LUTIN to unlock exclusive access to the best Displate deal before it's gone. So check out Displate today as you'll be supporting myself and the channel, and I'm pleased to say that Displate is a product I would now gladly recommend. I fully plan on adding more to the collection, especially for game days, so that my faction of choice can get the psychological warfare bonus they deserve from the walls of the new 40k studio. Thanks to Displate for sponsoring this video, and please check out the links below. Once more do we return to the truest grim darkness of the 41st millennium. For those who are still new to the galaxy of the Imperium, one of its most intriguing aspects is the disconnect between the reality presented by the Imperium and that which is experienced by the ordinary human citizens who exist within the all-consuming hive cities. It's well established that Warhammer 40k is a bleak, dark parody of human civilization. It's a reality of despair, horror, and oppression filtered through the Imperium's self-aggrandizing lens. But what's perhaps less often discussed is that the galaxy of M41 is almost entirely shaped by that same perspective. It's not something always immediately apparent to newcomers to 40k, of which there are a great many right now, and so it's important to realise that much of the lore is presented to us as a form of Imperial propaganda. It's fiction wrapped in fiction, framed in biased, incomplete reports of those whose worldview is both twisted and tightly controlled by the bureaucratic machinery of the Imperium. I've said before now that Warhammer 40,000 is comparable to a mystery where the detective character is so worn down by decades of thankless toil and disillusionment that they no longer have faith in the institutions they serve, and any answers when they do come are rarely satisfying or clean. Here lies the true horror, the ambiguity, the loose ends, the crushing realization that things are often in fact far worse than imagined or described. This mirrors the lived experience of those within the Imperium, where truth is obscured, hope is scarce, and any form of certainty a luxury few can afford. Understandably, for some fans, this can be frustrating or even disillusioning, because almost by design, 40k itself is unstable and ambiguous. Much of the world building is sweeping, broad, and leaves significant room for interpretation. In short, it's thin on details, which is, again, by design. It allows fans, though, and writers alike, to create their own reasonably plausible ideas within that established framework about how things might be handled, or logically what kind of hardware manufacturing processes, roles, jobs, lifestyles, and so on may exist in 40k. Now, this is a long-standing series for the channel. It's been ongoing for a few years now, and I started out with 40k jobs that I knew existed, but this got thinner on the ground as we went along quite quickly. Nonetheless, all the jobs we've covered in previous videos are, at least to me, highly plausible that I would place within an 80 to 90% chance of existing in the 40k galaxy. And that is similarly the case with today's offering. Some of these may be undocumented, but it's also logically plausible that these roles exist, and that's the interesting thing about 40k, because as I have said before, it's a jigsaw, and sometimes to complete a puzzle you have to fill in some gaps yourself mentally to then know where to fit the other pieces you have. But just to state it as always, it is important to understand in the galaxy of 40k that when we talk about jobs in the Imperium, it's almost laughable to use that word, because most citizens don't have careers, they have roles or assignments. These may be hereditary or likely dictated to them by a religious or administrative planetary bureaucracy, and that sees them as little more than numbers on a data slate. For those who do work within guilds or hive core, their work is contained within that specific bubble of existence. For most, their work is a life sentence, and often from birth, their fates as immutable as the stars themselves. So whether you toil in a manufactorum, farm the fields of an agri-world, or march to war as an expendable guardsman, your life is never your own. Your choices, if they exist at all, are limited by the rigid systems of control that define Imperial existence. And if you happen to live in a system like Ultramar, where there is marginally more actual freedom, it's still within the boundaries of suffocating Imperial dogma. Currency, too, is a foreign concept to most citizens. The Imperium is simply too vast and unstable for a unified economic system to function. So hive worlds may have local currencies, hive credits, guild tokens, but for the majority, barter and servitude are the only ways to really survive. For those rare few who traverse the galaxy, rogue traders, inquisitors, or high-ranking officials, there exists something of a loose, ambiguous currency called throne gelt. But for the common citizen, the idea of earning a wage is as distant as the stars themselves. Hive credits would be as close as it gets, and that's only enough to buy the essentials of existence and a little more. No wonder then that black markets in the underhive of a city exist to bring these small forbidden luxuries that all humans desire. How to acquire them though? That's the tricky existential, possibly fatal question. Because remember, In the galaxy of the Imperium, most humans will never leave the world of their birth. Many will never even see the sky outside the walls of their hive cities. They are born, they suffer, and die as cogs in the Imperium's vast, emotionless machine. They are as much a resource as ore mined from planets, as replaceable as ammunition spent in the unending wars. This, then, is the true horror of Warhammer 40,000. It's not the Xenos, it's not the heretics, it's the life of the ordinary human, the inescapable drudgery, the soul-destroying absence of hope, the slow, crushing realization that you will never be anything more than a small, insignificant part of a machine that doesn't care whether you live or die, but that you must care greatly about its continued existence. It's this suffering inflicted by humanity upon itself that is often far worse than the external alien threats that the larger governing body of the Imperium obsesses over, no matter how much in the grand scheme of things those threats are objectively more serious. So as always, I ask the question, if you were standing on the streets of a hive world, a forge world, or a feudal planet in M41, how would you serve and survive? What role would you see yourself most likely to play in this nightmare reality? Tell me down in the comments below. If you have any ideas for even worse fates than the ones already discussed, let me know. But once more, we enter into the bleak horror of human existence in M41. Now, I'm starting off with a more speculative offering, but I think not commonly described would in fact be a better phrasing. Orcs are one of the few Xenos to actively take something approaching prisoners that could also eventually become enslaved to them. The Tau usually seek diplomacy with isolated Imperial worlds, perhaps even allowing them a level of autonomy. The Eldar approach things with a dispassionate apathy unless it directly benefits them. Others, like the Tyrannid and Drakari, the less said the better, but no endings there are particularly desirable. When it comes to Orcs, it's a more unknown quantity, which fits well into the random chaos that defines their entire culture, because Orcs continue to be a very strange race in the sense that sometimes they can be little more than an annoyance, at other times a very literal existential threat. In a situation where an Orc clan or war boss comes to dominate a human world, which subsequently receives no military reinforcement, it's likely that any of the populace who are not outright killed would go to ground and dig in as some kind of resistance, while many more will be slaughtered or imprisoned. To what end, who can say? For some, they may end up as some sort of food source for the squigs, or sport and entertainment in the nightly game of how many Umis can survive a fight with a grot. The variations on this theme are likely substantial. For whatever reason though, it is entirely possible that one may end up in service to Orc masters, maybe if for nothing more than to annoy the grots. We've seen on planets where humans become strangely immersed in Orc culture, the Orcs find this quite funny and will even tolerate humans who start emulating them. Doesn't mean that they won't also fight with them at the same time, of course. So it's very believable that somehow a human would be forced to serve in the most degrading and perilous conditions imaginable, standing around and immediately beside the Orcs, crude and violent, as they delight in tormenting any and all, but most of all, of course, stupid Umis. Your daily tasks are likely pointless and demeaning, such as serving grotesque meals, cleaning up after destructive feasts, fighting and annoying the grots, not to mention Orcs' foul tempers and their unpredictable fits of violence just erupting at any time. Learning when to anticipate this and not be in the way when it happens will be pivotal to your daily survival. Even if you were to successfully learn to anticipate this, your life will remain under a constant risk of being killed for sport or by accident, as Orcs will often humiliate their human servants for just entertainment, treating them as little more than expendable pets. To which you might think this could benefit you, as an Orc master might defend you somewhat if you were favoured. I think this would only be true to a very minimal degree, because orcs would surely be very annoyed if another abused their pet or other familiar, but they would also expect you to stand up and defend yourself. The horrifying reality of life as an Ork Butler is one of constant fear and subjugation. The orc's brutal nature means that even simple tasks are fraught with danger. Almost any task can result in being physically beaten, mocked, paired with a very high chance of being required to perform absurd, demeaning acts just for a laugh. Not to mention simply having to exist in a daily reality surrounded by Xenos horrors. Any decent Imperial would say, why do they not go down fighting, or seek the Emperor's peace? An easy answer for any who have served in the Guard or at some other military or judicial position within the Imperium. Not so much for the ordinary humans who are just weak, cowardly, or dream of impossible escape scenarios in which they save themselves and perhaps others, and so they endure. The mental and physical toll is immense. Living in close proximity to orcs means enduring their overwhelming stench, the non-stop casual violence, the unpredictable chaotic routines. What worked for you the day before may cause immediate rage in an orc today, tomorrow it will change again. Orcs are also inherently filthy, so their layers are filled with grime, food scraps, bodily waste, all of which you would be tasked to clean up. The human's physical endurance is pushed to its limits, as any signs of weakness will be viewed as an invitation for violence. The mental strain is equally exhausting. Do you maintain a submissive demeanour at all times, even when faced with ridicule and threats in the hope that you remain largely invisible? Or do you have a stronger attitude in the hopes of gaining a modicum of respect, but that also likely risks having your arms torn from your sockets at any time? Severe psychological trauma would become a guarantee for the humans in these situations. The unpredictable nature of orc cruelty means there's no escape from the constant extreme stress and anxiety of how you will survive each day in your role as an Ork Butler. Initially, daily survival is your most pressing concern, but over time, your sanity is equally at risk. Escape would be nearly impossible, and the crushing realization that their lives are utterly disposable within Orc society is going to lead to a deep sense of hopelessness. Because whether being beaten to death in a fit of Orc rage or just discarded when they're no longer entertaining, few will survive in this role. Even if they manage to endure, their bodies are often broken by the constant physical abuse, their minds shattered by the relentless psychological torment. For the very rare few who can outlast their captors, the long-term effects of surviving such horrors will leave them deeply scarred. And then you still have the gauntlet of Imperial assessment, who may simply deem you to be too high a risk for reintegration within the wider Imperium. Most likely, your lack of attempts to successfully escape or inflict damage upon the orcs themselves from within would also restrict you from returning to any role, but also leave you deemed strong enough for conversion to servitor. In short, life as an Ork Butler is one of unending misery, where survival depends on navigating the violent whims of the orcs whilst performing their absurd, confusing tasks, all while in an environment where you bear witness to whatever human survivors remain in the aftermath of an orc planetary assault, treated as little more than disposable entertainment for the crude barbarism of the orc menace or the daily feeding to the squigs. Now, something I have seen rarely discussed or described is the role of battlefield scavenger. 40k is a reality of desperation and grim necessity, so it's more than reasonable to understand that in the aftermath of significant battles, there would be a retrieval and recovery effort to make use of what was still functional and not simply leave it to rot or be appropriated by those with questionable intent. Not to mention the fact that many pieces of hardware, from personal weapons through to titans, are viewed as holy artifacts with the Emperor's blessings upon them, and not something to be just abandoned as battlefield detritus. Not to mention the more practical angle that it would be vital to recover usable equipment, weapons, armor, or other advanced technology to maintain the Imperial war machine. This role exists because in many regions of the galaxy, the Imperium's resources are stretched thin, and they cannot afford to waste anything that can be retrieved, loaded onto ships, returned to a Forge World or Mechanicus district within a Hive or an Astartes world, where these objects can either be recycled, refurbished, or repurposed. Low-level adepts or other human industrial workers may take on the role of preliminary scouting parties, likely armed as battlefields will still be dangerous. Their role is with a lens of providing information to higher ranks of Mechanicus, who would then best designate more specific resources in the recovery efforts. Yet for these later teams to be deployed as efficiently as possible, before that happens, teams of scavenging human drones are sent out in typically Imperial fashion, that is to say, in entirely disposable quantities. One of the greatest efforts to recover would undoubtedly be the raw resources present within the remains of an Imperial Titan. These holy machines of war are so immense that the fabrication of their critical hardware is no small thing. Thus, salvaging a Titan is both a monumental yet also extremely hazardous process. Walking near to the many dangerous chemicals and energy systems of a Titan are not at all conducive to good human health. Once base details then are established, a full recovery effort could be carried out by specialized Mechanicus salvage teams. But Titanic war machines after falling in battle will often be surrounded by wreckage, radiation, and highly dangerous battlefield conditions. So salvagers attempting to secure the site may be faced with threats like unstable power cores, still active Titanic-scale weaponry, not to mention any enemies who have been hiding or managed to survive in some degree. So scavengers risk their lives by walking through battlefields still laden with danger. They'll face unexploded ordnance, residual toxins, radiation from weaponry, twisted molten remains of mechanical giants, and in general just unstable debris. Additionally, scavenging around Xenos corpses brings its own dangers. Alien biology can be virulent, releasing spores, corrosive fluids, and even psychic remnants. So some Xenos horrors, even after death, may still possess mechanisms or instincts capable of killing the scavengers outright. On battlefields that saw humanity face the insidious threat of chaos, it presents its own challenges, as they may hear whispers through their head as they trudge the battlefield. One among their number finds a scrap of parchment with words inscribed upon it. In time, this could become the founding of a new cult. A trinket discovered holds mysterious power. The possibilities are endless, and as such, there's a significant possibility that any deployed to pick the battlefield of a Chaos Imperium showdown may face a firing squad upon their return. Beyond all this, the psychological toll of handling whatever remains of corpses and comrades, even enemies, is immense. It's not only the visible impact of a battle, but more the apathetic scale of war in M41, leading many scavengers to depression, detachment from their humanity. Physical conditions also quickly will deteriorate, with many dying from sickness, injury, or exposure to innumerable dangerous elements. Most battlefield scavengers come from the lowest social strata, to the surprise of none. Criminals or those exiled to serve in this capacity as part of a punishment, while others are Hive City residents or refugees desperate for work, no matter how dangerous. Sometimes entire penal legions or labour forces could be assigned to this duty, but few will enter this job by choice, as the expectation of death and other debilitating injury is high. For those who survive long enough, the promise of a brief respite or slightly better conditions might await, though only temporarily. It's a grim job that speaks to the Imperium's disregard for human life, valuing materials over people. From what's recovered, the remains are then broken down piece by piece, with critical components like plasma reactors, void shield generators, and sacred machine components being secured and returned for recycle or reuse. Larger Titans may require entire legions of thralls, labourers, servitors, and specialised equipment to dismantle and transport them back to Forge Worlds. So the process can be extremely slow and meticulous, given that many of the Titan's parts are considered holy relics by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Any careless handling could be seen as heretical, leading to punishment or execution for the crew. Therefore, salvaging these mechanical giants is a delicate balance between technical skill and religious reverence. This is true of so many things in the Imperium. But despite being an essential role, scavengers are entirely disposable. For should they perish, there are always more to take their place. The recovery of high-value technology is significantly prioritised over the human scum who perform such a role, and scavengers who are tasked with this are likely already facing the end of a las rifle if they choose not to perform this activity. At the same time, any who fail in their duties face severe punishment or the end of a las rifle. Still, at least it gets you out in the open air and not the bowels of a hive sewer. Speaking of which, spare a thought for those trapped in the bowels of a void ship sewer. Life aboard a void ship is for most of the indentured workers already a grim claustrophobic existence filled with discomfort and constant danger, from themselves as much as anything. The atmosphere is stale, with recycled air smelling faintly of chemicals and sweat. The lighting is dim and the corridors narrow, creating a perpetual encroaching feeling of entrapment. The endless hum of machinery grinds away at the sanity of the crew, and the isolation of deep space only exacerbates the feeling of being lost amid a vast metal coffin. Only the so-called Voidborn are comfortable here, those who are literally born in space aboard the fleet vessels of the Imperium, be those rogue traders, Imperial Navy or industrial workers. But most aboard the ships will be recruited from Imperial planets, entirely without them knowing that they would then spend the rest of their lives never to breathe real atmospheric air of a planet ever again. Then again, in saying that, many likely were already born upon a hive world, and so they probably never even saw the dawn of a morning sun. The world was so polluted that even if they did step outside, the sky above would be grey and bleak. So for those on the lower decks, the misery is even more pronounced. These areas are humid and oppressive, packed with unwashed bodies, as overworked labourers toil endlessly. Workers sleep in cramped random bunks on the cold floor, surrounded by noise from engines, servitors, and chemical discharge. Food rations are tasteless, nutrient blocks, often infested with vermin. Access to fresh water is limited, and illness, should it erupt, can spread quickly in the overcrowded conditions, leading to the nightmare scenario of areas of the ship being locked down. What happens after this? Well, probably best not to think about that, but likely they will be needing some new workers on the next hive world they pass by. Imperial void ships are vast and ancient. They're not simply transports or warships, they're constructs where entire generations may live and die. Thus, the internal workings of the ship are critical, and despite the hardships and filth, they must be made to function as well as they can, for the survival of all within depend upon it. Now, more dangerous jobs such as external maintenance or warp shielding repair carried out in extreme conditions do exist, and these can see workers risk death from explosive decompression, radiation, or the sudden appearance of warp anomalies as they traverse the galaxy. And this can lead to anything ranging from hallucinations, sleeplessness, fits of emotion, unending headaches, or a slow creeping descent into madness. But in the heart of the void ship's endless decks, the isolation and bleakness of life combine with the constant risk of death. Yet for those who land in the unlucky position of shipboard sanitation worker, they will face all of this, plus the benefit of having a particularly grim job aboard the void ship. These individuals are responsible for managing the waste systems that serve thousands or tens of thousands of crew members. Yet it's not all human waste. They must also clean and maintain disposal units, deal with toxic sewage, prevent system malfunctions, which could spell disaster in the enclosed environments of space, none of which though are particularly appealing, no matter how interesting waste management engineering could be. The work is unsurprisingly as perilous as it is unpleasant, with exposure to hazardous chemicals, infectious diseases, and the risk of contamination, all whilst working in extremely cramped, narrow spaces. You're often also tasked with crews of servitors, who are of course not particularly fun or desirable to be around. The waste systems and atmospheric scrubbers can include not just regular human waste and the pathogens, but also a deadly mixture combined with other byproducts from machines of war on board, not to mention potential organic remains from Xenos or crew members who have succumbed to a deadly infection as a result of Xenos contact. This could have occurred whilst in low orbit of a planet, or from contact upon a hive world or other planet. Void ship sanitation workers then are commonly overlooked and treated as being expendable, plus enjoy a very low social status aboard the ship. This is despite the fact that their work is of a critical importance. Because low maintenance or failure to clear out all the waste management systems within the ship can easily lead to catastrophic failures which will have an exponential impact on the entire ship, such as contaminated water supplies or failing air filtration systems. These workers are also some of the first to be blamed when things go wrong, even if their work conditions or adjacent events are to blame for the actual failures. Like many of the worst jobs in the Imperium, those who perform this work are usually from the lowest strata of society. Some are indentured servants, prisoners, or low-ranking crew members with no other option. It's a thankless, dangerous job where failure could lead to execution, while success only means the privilege of continuing the drudgery. Nothing to write home about, of course, within the cruel, indifferent Imperium of mankind, where lives are worth less than the equipment they must maintain at all costs. A passing mention here, as this is one worth stating, but there's little more you can do for this than just state it as existing. For this is a role which is defined as such, simply existing. An auxiliary servitor is basically as it sounds. It provides a supplementary function. And I think people became more aware of these roles in the Space Marine 2 game recently released, where I saw a few people take note of the guys who are basically delimbed humans and function as a door activation mechanism. I like to imagine people new to 40k being very horrified, and everybody else who's at this point so deep in that they can't see a way out being like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So there's little to say about auxiliary servitors beyond, if you thought being assigned as a regular servitor was bad enough, there's still always a step down in 40k that you didn't see coming. And you might have thought, well, even as a servitor, I get to serve the Emperor. And it's true, but maybe you didn't imagine that you would literally become a human door switch. A Luminal Servant is something I've often joked about in the past. I've mentioned it often in passing and did recently during Space Marine 2, where basically anywhere there is suddenly a significant amount of candles, I'm like, who's lighting all these candles? Do they light them every day? Who has to come back and check the candles are lit? Who cleans up the wax? Is there a ceremony to this? It's all very comical and 40k to me, and it fits neatly into the jobs of bizarre obscurity that are somehow still part of the servitude hierarchy of the Imperium, where even the smallest tasks become monumental duties steeped in ritual and human suffering. So I decided to expand speculatively upon this task as a Luminal Servant, a lowly figure responsible for maintaining the countless lights that adorn the temples, estates and sacred places of the Imperium, because like so much of 40k lore, it's both very serious and also hilarious. Because whilst it might seem mundane and tedious at first glance, this role is but a macro scale of the larger, cruel futility that defines life under the Imperium's societal structures. And while this role is undoubtedly tedious and soul-destroying, I think it's definitely a double-edged sword of a role, because in the Imperium, light is not merely a tool to banish darkness, it's a symbol of purity, faith, and the Emperor's divine radiance. So while the job itself is simplistic and mind-numbing, unlike so many other terrible roles, at least you're likely granted a modicum of respect among others. The Mechanicus, for example, they might likely see the maintenance of light as a sacred duty to illuminate the chambers of the machine god and bring light to the knowledge that it has provided upon mankind. Luminals keep this light perpetually burning, and so this is not just functional, but a symbolic form of worship. The light must not be extinguished, just as the knowledge of humanity must never be lost. It must be preserved, tended, and protected. Luminal servants would be typically also assigned to the palatial estates of imperial nobles, navigator guilds, and of course the immense cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, sororitas, other sanctums, including those of the Mechanicus. So the Luminal's task is unending. It is to maintain the constant illumination of these sacred or noble spaces. This means attending and renewing the candles, oil lamps, illuminator globes that must never be allowed to go dark. On high status worlds, especially shrine or cardinal worlds, this role could become even more important. In fact, it's a strange job that, dependent on where you serve, it could be seen as lowly, mundane, insignificant, or extremely highly respected, powerful even. Upon religious worlds of the Imperium, the sanctity of light is revered as a direct manifestation of the Emperor's divine will. Every candle or illuminator in these places represents the Emperor's eternal vigilance and purity. A flickering flame symbolizes the undiminished hope amid the darkness of a galaxy consumed by war. Yet the power and respect that comes with this may also bring additional scrutiny. On some dark corner of a manufactorum, a single candle losing its light may bring nothing more than a verbal disciplining. Anything worse may be some other sanction or maybe a physical penalty. On a religious world, be that of the sororitas or just ecclesiarchy, it could be a considerably worse penalty. For the symbolic weight in allowing a light to be extinguished, we could be talking anything from public physical penance to some horrifying purification ritual with fire. In the most extreme scenario, it could even extend to death, depending on the perceived importance of the location and the piety of the overseer. Perhaps they could even face being burned alive as a symbol of the Emperor's eternal fire. So a Luminal Servant walks this line between drudging misery and respect, but the constant threat of punishment for failure remains, of course, ever present. In terms of the day-to-day, this is the kind of role that I would consider extends beyond our ordinary concept of time, because this is a role from which there is no reprieve, ever. They will rotate in and out of duty, but the scale of diligence required means that they must operate effectively 24 hours and have no permanent habitation area. They eat while they walk, drink when they find the time, and sleep in narrow alcoves scattered throughout the estates or temples, always ready to be awakened at a moment's notice. For the sacred spaces they maintain must remain permanently illuminated. Many will span tens of miles of winding hallways, towering spires, cavernous chapels, and small sanctums. In the vast, seemingly unending cathedrals, tens of thousands of candles burn at all hours, at all times. Each must be tended with reverence, as some of the candles are so large and ornate that it may take hours to ascend ladders or mechanical lifts to reach them. Other illuminators run on oils blessed by ecclesiarchy priests, and these must be replenished constantly, as allowing the lamps to dim or go out could be seen as heresy. Acquiring the oils, though, is an entire ordeal in itself, much like how securing some hardware for the Imperial Guard, like the Deathstrike missile, is extremely convoluted just because of the many sanctifying rituals that must be performed first. So to secure the oils, they themselves will be stored in deep vaults, requiring servants to make long journeys through claustrophobic tunnels or decaying substructures to reach them. When they arrive, they'll require correct requisition orders, then have to stand by as ceremonies are conducted before finally the materials are released. Atop all of this, due to the unending and high attention required for the role, it seems likely that many Luminal servants will begin to lose their sanity over time. Some probably develop personal superstitions, believing that the candles are watching them, or that failing to tend a specific section at a particular time will bring misfortune. Maybe there is a specific candle that will only light for a specific luminal individual. And many of these beliefs will stem from the fact that they are often left alone for significant periods of time, wandering through vast, isolated structures The whispers in dark corners become ever more pervasive until they finally begin to feel overwhelmed by the silence, the flickering lights, and the sense that they're being watched. Not by human eyes, but by the judgmental gaze of the Emperor himself, but perhaps even something more. Then there still are the physical risks of this role. Lighting candles, how can that be dangerous? Well, have you seen the structures of the Imperium and how they build them? A Luminal must scale immense spires, crawl through narrow ducts and venture into forgotten, crumbling sections of these structures where danger lurks in every shadow. In the highest reaches of cathedral spires, the risk of falling to one's death is going to be constant. On many shrine worlds, these workers scale dizzying heights without safety harnesses. Their hands are blistered from climbing ancient, rusted, dangerous ladders just to reach a single sacred candle. All of this inevitably takes its toll on the body, breathing hard from the physically demanding job amid smoke from the lower quality burning candles and oil lamps day after day, hour after hour, not to mention just the pollution of wherever they're working within, and this over years can lead to respiratory diseases, cancers, perhaps even mutation or other physical problems. Lastly, there is simply the abstract human factor. Many Luminal servants will just disappear. They're usually low-ranking, alone. They wander into the dark corners of Imperial structures, to which any number of disturbing threats may be lying in wait. For those Luminals who survive to a point where they can no longer perform their duties, their final fate is often conversion into a servitor, ensuring that even in their final moments of usefulness, they will serve the Imperium. So the role of a Luminal servant is a strange one, to be sure. Dependent on the world you found yourself upon, it may not be the most horrific of roles, yet there is no upward mobility, no possibility of escape from what will eventually be a fairly unpleasant end in any scenario. Many will be assigned to the role young, so they'll never know anything else. They exist largely anonymously, names rarely exchanged even among one another, and as they fall, often mid-duty, they're forgotten, remembered only as part of the faceless masses who serve the Imperium's relentless hunger for service. A Luminal, to me, is a greatly symbolic role within the Imperium of M41, where even the smallest task is infused with ritual meaning paired with inhuman suffering and despair. Many will learn the indifferent reality that in the end even the holy light itself brings no comfort, salvation, or relief. The role of a Reliquarist in the 41st millennium is another that is deeply enmeshed with both spiritual and material realities of the Imperium. Imperial history is filled with tales of powerful artifacts linked to the Emperor, Trademarks, and saints. Many of these, while legendary, are significantly apocryphal, but those that do exist are heavily guarded. Some will serve as marks of office, while others are stored in vaults or reliquaries on Terra or shrine worlds. Despite this, many relics are still lost to time and conflicts, prompting constant searches by individuals and rogue traders. They may range from simple objects to powerful weapons, bones, teeth, fragments of skin, as well as historical objects like banners, clothing, weapons, and armour, all of which will be highly valued for their connection to their original owner beyond whatever practical function they serve. So a Reliquarist occupies a position between reverence and preservation. They often will serve the ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Ministorum, or other religious institutions, but their duties are perilous and complex, for they're tasked with safeguarding these relics, which may be anything from the bones of saints to ancient weaponry. The main role, though, of a Reliquarist is to locate and authenticate the venerated relics of importance to the Imperium, as many are believed to possess the Emperor's divine blessings, inspire faith and devotion across Imperial worlds. When placed in cathedrals or carried into battle, they can boost the morale of the populace and military forces, instilling a deep sense of spiritual protection, in some cases even having a visible protective or restorative function. The challenges then facing a Reliquarist are significant, as they must act as both a guardian, curator, and a mediator, defending these sacred objects from theft, desecration, or corruption, and that brings them regularly into ethical, practical dilemmas, in the sense of, firstly, authenticating relics in the age of the Imperium is often quite a subjective process, and the pressures surrounding a true or false claim could be significant, and not without genuine danger to the reliquarists themselves. It is common for relics to be false, created either by unscrupulous individuals or genuinely mistaken in their origins. The burden rests upon the reliquarist to decide whether to expose the truth and risk shaking the faith of the people, or to propagate the lie in order to maintain morale. This constant knife-edge dance between reverence and ruin is an immense burden to carry and may have very literal ramifications in the aftermath. In some instances, it could very well determine the stability of a world. Such decisions may mark out a deep psychological toll on a reliquarist, because many are torn between loyalty to the Emperor and the pressures of knowing that where some relics could be fabrications, they may also have to present them as sacred, as it's going to be significantly beneficial. Yet, by the nature of their service, most reliquarists are devout Imperial servants. They have strong faith in the Imperial cult. Having to pass off fake holy relics now and then might be something that they can keep their conscience in check with by just telling themselves that it was necessary and reasonable. Yet the more often this has to occur, then it's more likely they're going to be consumed by paranoia, guilt, even the fear of being discovered as a heretic. Others may simply find their faith fundamentally challenged and become cynical and apathetic. They might see their work as a necessary charade to keep the population in line, and that's going to lead to a slow moral decay, which also undermines the efforts of other reliquarists. Some will turn to extreme forms of self-purification, fasting, flagellation, or isolation in order to cope with the burden of their role. And the stress of maintaining the faith of billions can lead them down paths of fanaticism, or conversely lead them to question the very faith they're meant to uphold. All of this internalized pressure can result in psychological breakdowns or radical actions, such as stealing or hoarding relics for personal study, or even turning against the ecclesiarchy in an attempt to purge false relics. One could imagine that a reliquarist could eventually snap and just begin purging en masse to clear out the wrongs that they've done. Others may descend into the underhive, leading crusades of purification, joining other gangs of zealots that seek to just purge heretics from the lower hive, whether they're really heretics or not. There's often likely a significant amount of guilt driving these activities, misdirection from their own failures through the campaigns. Lastly, many relics are to be found in very dangerous locations, war-torn worlds, ancient tombs, or sites tainted by chaos. So many a reliquarist has had to lead expeditions into hostile environments, risking life and soul to recover the sacred artifacts. Yet in doing so, they risk exposure to chaos-tainted relics where prolonged contact can corrupt even the most stalwart among the faithful. Again, to counter this, many reliquarists undergo self-imposed, brutal purification rites. In extreme cases, they may be excommunicated or banished if they're deemed to be tainted, but some may even carry out such sentences upon themselves, and again launch some zealous individual crusade against known regions or sectors filled with the heretics. This often means, again, usually the underhive. The ultimate fate of a reliquarist will depend on how well they navigate the treacherous waters of their role. Those who can balance their faith and fulfill their duties are heavily revered. They're seen as being rightful bastions of faith and fortitude, leaders among the cult, and highly respected in the ecclesiarchy, much like inquisitors that do their job well. Others, though, could be consumed by doubt, paranoia, or heresy and fall entirely from grace, meeting an unpleasant end either through execution, exile, or just being driven mad by the burdens of their office. Some may even face trial and possible interrogation followed by execution at the hands of the Inquisition. Like so many Imperial roles, though, most reliquarists will labour in obscurity. their contributions known only to the few who truly understand the importance of their sacred work. It's another complex role that can be a powerful one if you were strong enough. But for many, they simply cling to their faith for as long as possible before imploding in sometimes spectacular fashion. Now, as is typical with these explorations of more human roles in 40k, I often finish with something that is not physically harrowing nor a brutal torture chamber of suffering, but is still a role of unending, soul-destroying boredom. Something which is significantly unpleasant in the moral, ethical, or weight of responsibility that is placed upon an individual category. To this end, we might consider those who find themselves in the role of the Imperial Propagandist, the ranks of the Imperial bureaucracy, because this remains a critical, albeit ethically fraught role in shaping not only public opinion, but the reality of life in the Imperium, blending truth and fiction to keep a vast, crumbling empire from collapsing into quite literal chaos. The individuals tasked with shaping public perception and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor, all while suppressing any notion of weakness or dissent, will involve creation of stories that glorify Imperial victories, rewrite or erase failures, and will very often distort historical facts to fit a prescribed narrative. They must also, of course, demonize the known enemies of the Imperium, especially Xenos. However, these may be more ambiguous, remembering that many Imperial citizens are totally unaware that Xenos exist at all in the first place, and the less said about chaos the better. But the individual moral burden is immense, as Imperial propagandists may knowingly have to condemn innocent populations in order to cover up other atrocities, all in the name of broader stability. They may also be responsible for stoking fervour and zealotry, leading to unseen levels of fanaticism and even mass purges among human populations. Their work keeps the Imperium unified, but at the cost of truth, individual rights, and basic concepts of ethics and morality. They may even entirely fabricate events or heroes, weaving fiction into history to keep their population in line, contribute to a world where reality and myth are indistinguishable, or sometimes in the service of individuals rising to power. But of course, this is one of the greatest problems that Rabute Guilliman faced upon his return to the Imperium, as he began to read through the history of the Imperium that he had missed during his absence. He soon began to realise the horrifying reality that much of what had been recorded was either so biased as to be entirely unusable, or heavily redacted, adapted, or just outright fabricated. So those in the role of the Imperial Propagandist might craft stories of larger-than-life heroes who single-handedly turned the tide of war against overwhelming alien forces. Now, to be fair, many of these do already exist in actuality in the Imperium, in the guise of course, the Astartes and so on. However, sometimes it is necessary to fabricate these as it is required, and so one might question, is that really a bad thing? Because such figures serve an important role for the populations of hive cities where people believe in these myths, they maintain positive spirits and even will rally behind them in times of great despair. The fact that such figures may not have existed specifically at all seems generally largely irrelevant. The worst crime of all, though, and one which has caused significant problems for Guilliman, is that over 10,000 years many Imperial servants have engaged in the amending of historical records, to where entire planetary histories have been altered to paint the Imperium as a benevolent force with a considerable focus on erasing evidence of violent suppression against populations or other mass purges. This is designed to ensure that future generations never question the actions of the Imperium, growing up in a carefully controlled version of reality. Should anybody go digging, all they'll find are the records that reassert the reality they already know and are told. So what effect does this all have upon the Imperial propagandists themselves? It's very likely variable, because undoubtedly there will be those who live lives in this role without sparing any kind of thought for the wider damage caused. In fact, very likely the opposite. They will see themselves as essential, serving a genuinely positive role for the Imperium, whereas others may have lived lives outside of the bureaucracy before falling into the role, may undergo severe mental and emotional strain at just what it is they're doing. At first they may attempt to justify their work as somehow serving the greater good, but over time the constant manipulation of truth erodes their sense of self. The tangible harm of lying to their fellow citizens whilst knowing the brutal realities of the Imperium leads to, much like the Reliquarist, guilt, paranoia, sometimes madness. Others will just become jaded, disconnected, viewing human life as expendable, while others break down completely, overwhelmed by the lies upon lies they've created, and that often unintentionally led to the death of millions. So the propagandist's ultimate fate can vary considerably. Some might find some solace in their zealotry, convincing themselves that their lies are very necessary for humanity's very survival, but others will be consumed by guilt or madness. They might attempt to flee, but they would likely be hunted down and executed by the Imperium for their knowledge of state secrets. A rare few might try to rebel or speak out, leading then inevitably to their swift silencing through execution or servitor conversion and mind-wiping. Ironically, of course, very likely it would be propagandists who then cover up whatever occurred to them. But as is the case for all within the grim universe of 40k, even those who take positions considered relatively safe and that do not actively expose them to the horrors of the galaxy are never truly safe, for they must bear witness to the truth, the soul-crushing reality that they must shoulder, often alone, and know that while there is laudable aspects to their role in the vast machine of the Imperium, they can never escape the knowledge of the bleak horrors and mentally destructive reality that they help to conceal and obscure. For ultimately, whatever fate befalls the Emperor's Imperial servants, the only certain truth is that they will not be missed. A big thanks to all for joining me on this video today, and to Displate for sponsoring it. Be sure to check out the links below and tell me your suggestions for the next worst jobs of the Imperium whenever that next installment will come. As always, please like the video if you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.